Well, hello and welcome to another Tyrrell's Classic Workshop. This is somewhat of a cheeky smash and grab, to use a media expression. I'm down with the TV people. This is a car that we've had in for a fairly simple job, a new alternator, actually. But I thought I'd just make the opportunity to make a video on this while it's here, because it's quite an interesting piece of Aston Martin's history, and actually a car I quite like. It's called an Aston Martin V8 Coupé, along with about 50 gazillion other models of Aston Martin over the years. I am slightly exaggerating and being ever so slightly facetious. There are lots of car manufacturers who have used the same name on various generations of cars. I think Ford had 4 generations of the Cortina, if I'm not mistaken, but they were all after one another. And the funny thing is, Aston Martin's first V8 was 1969, I think, something like that. And they've sort of gone through gaps, really. They called the predecessor to this the Virage instead of another V8 Coupe. Then they brought out a very much updated and warmed over Virage and called it, guess what, the V8 Coupe. And then we had the V8, the smaller car, come out in the noughties, I think, which was the V8 Vantage. So it goes on and on. But anyway, be that as it may, there's nothing wrong with an Aston Martin. They're great cars. And as I say, this is, for me, this is a particularly interesting car. It looks like Rolls-Royce Peacock Blue to me, this colour, because Aston Martin and Rolls-Royce tended to share the same colours and hues at this time. But the interesting thing is, they only made 101 of these in total. Very rare car. That's both left-hand drive and right-hand drive versions. This is a rare car. It was hand-built. It was the Halo model, apart from the later twin supercharged Vantage, but which we covered actually in a few videos back. We had a beautiful V600 Le Mans Vantage, or V550 Le Mans Vantage, a while back. Same car, but very heavily modified. But this is the standard cooking car, and I actually quite like it. I happen to think it's a nice car to drive. It's not as much of an adrenaline rush as the Vantage, and it's worth looking at that video because it really is a very interesting car. This is not as much of an adrenaline rush, but it's more of an all-round sort of touring package. You can take this car on long journeys, and that's sort of what it's built for. It's a good touring car, this, really. It's come in, as I say, it's had a new alternator. It's going to have a couple of bits of paintwork done to it, and we consulted the owner, and I've grabbed the opportunity to do a video on it. I've looked after various of these other 101 cars before, but they just work very well. It's a sort of interesting transition in Aston Martin's history. I think Ford still owned them by the time this car was built, so that's why a lot of the switchgear is out of a Ford Escort and other such cars. But that's the way it was survival for Aston Martin. They couldn't possibly organise their own switchgear and pay for their own switchgear. In fact, these days, because switchgear is so expensive in cars, that's why so many of them are going towards the touchscreen, because a touchscreen is cheap. You have it made in the Ukraine or China or wherever, and you just stab at everything, get thoroughly distracted while you're driving, altering the air conditioning or the hi-fi or whatever it happens to be. Whereas on this, and cars of its ilk, you actually have physical switches that you can touch, but they're more expensive. The touchscreen is super cheap by comparison. That's why they've all gone that way. So we have a genuine analog switched car here. It's got, I think it's a really nice looking car, this. It was, I think, designed by Wayne Cherry, if I'm not mistaken, who designed the Vauxhall Calibra around the same time, which was another very pretty car, actually. I've done, as I say, but Corey's done the alternator on this car, and we're going to take it out for a run and just see what makes this car, why I like them so much, really. Well, the Aston Martin V8 is very, it's quite similar to the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. Forgive the rather strange comparison, but it started life rather infamously. Aston Martin developed it under the wonderful auspices of Tadek, Marek, who designed the straight six engine that came before it in the DB4, 5 and 6, etc. But it started life rather ignominiously because it wasn't a success to start with. They had problems with bearings running out and feathering and things like that. So it took them a while to get it right, but very much like the Merlin engine, once it was right, it was absolutely beautiful and did everything it said on the tin and more. And in this respect, this engine is the same. It started life rather ingloriously, and Tadek Marek famously took the design away for, I think, 3 days and 3 nights and worked solidly to work on the lubrication system to get it working properly, and he succeeded. And at a stroke, the original V8 engine with the mechanical fuel injection worked well. The engine itself was fabulously reliable and beautifully made, hand-built, all aluminium V8. And then it was 2 valves per cylinder, 4 cam. And then when Aston Martin brought this series of cars out, they turned to Callaway in the US, who is famous for his work on Corvettes, amongst other things, making some fantastic modified Corvettes, very fast cars. And he reworked the cylinder heads on this, 4 valves per cylinder, and again turned the engine into a next stage of being a very contemporary and magnificent mill. The end result was spectacular. So yeah, it really is a thing of joy. The one thing I would point out, this iteration of the engine, the same as the later 2 valve per cylinder V8s fitted in the Series 5 Aston Martin V8 coupes. I covered one of those a few videos ago, a pale blue metallic one. They're equipped with this Weber Marelli injection system. These are the idle stepper motors, 1 each bank. And the Weber Marelli system can cause the engine to hunt when it's cold, particularly. The revs fluctuate between sort of 700 and 1200 constantly in a pattern, and it doesn't sound too pleasant actually, but worry not. They all do that, sir. So if you're in a fortunate position to have one of these or a previous generation fuel injected Aston Martin or Lagonda, then if the revs fluctuate like that, it is something that they all do. So worry not, just you'll have to live with it basically. Oh dear, definitely a first world problem. But there we go. It's a beautiful bit of kit, this lovely engine, fantastic Anglo-American collaboration, and let's take it on the road and see if this car is all it promises to be. Well, I'm just warming this through gently, as usual. It's been a little while since I've road tested one of these, actually. I haven't had one sort of in for work for a few years, actually, of the 101. But I always remember it being a very complete car to drive. It sort of was a good all-round car in terms of balance of effort of controls, performance, the ride not being too intrusive, the seats being comfortable, all this good stuff. Talking of the seats, we have, I think these seats, I think they're made by Recaro, if I'm not mistaken, probably have the record for the most number of buttons. We can do a close-up of this, but it is quite outrageous, the amount of adjustments that you can do to this seat. Even the Mercedes massage seats of the early noughties, I don't think quite as many buttons as this, but anyway, we're just warming it through. I've decided to wear the don, the flat cap and the gloves, because this is a sort of raffish car. That's how I would describe it. A very old English adjective, meaning not quite a cad, but a gent that that has interesting boundaries on life, I think is how I would describe a raffish gentleman. And yeah, so I'm cutting quite a dash in my string-back driving gloves and flat cap because it feels like that sort of car, this. And that is not a criticism. It's like a gentleman's express, at the risk of being very unwoke. But it's, yeah, already this car is growing on me because the suspension is not bumpy and crashy. It's very, very smooth. It's well damped. The body isn't lurching around or crashing into the bumps or anything like that, but it is very, very smooth. No body roll to speak of, just a lovely ride handling compromise, which of course is essential for a long distance car, particularly on Britain's road surfaces. So I'm already warming to this car, as indeed it is warming up to me. Yes, this, I would go as far as to say this is something of a hidden gem in the world of Aston Martins. Actually, they're not ferociously expensive compared to other cars, but they have every inch that sort of British, not quite British bulldog rawness of the Vantage, but certainly a real edge to them. 350 brake horsepower is not to be sniffed at. I know people bandy crazy horsepower figures around these days, but it's very adequate. 350 brake horsepower, and as I mentioned earlier, that lovely Callaway developed 4-cam 32 valve V8. So I think it's about time. We've got T's and P's, temperatures and pressures. Let's open the taps and see what this baby sounds like and goes like. That lovely Aston Martin V8 bellow. And again, everything, the accelerator, the brake, the steering, they are all beautifully balanced weight-wise. And this is something I never cease to go on about, is the fact that you can have a heavy clutch, light throttle, over-servoed brakes on a lot of, dare I say it, a lot of Audis, things like that. You can have dead steering with no feedback. This car has got the lot. It's got a very responsive General Motors 4L80E automatic gearbox, 4-speed auto, with a very eager kick down if you want it, but only if you want it. But the steering has got loads of feedback. The throttle's just the right weight. Again, here we go. That lovely V8 bellow that can only be an Aston Martin. It's a very different noise from American V8s. It's more like a growl. It's quite difficult to describe, but it's just a great car. It does so many things so well. You can even squeeze a couple of very small people in the back if you are so inclined. And of course, it does have this being, you know, as I said earlier, because Aston Martin have to raid other manufacturers' parts bins simply because of economies of scale. They simply could not afford to develop their own tooling and molds for products. Hence the fact we have this rather interesting, I believe on the Vantage Le Mans video, our American brethren particularly said this was out of a Ford Taurus or a Ford Explorer from the US, the steering wheel. But needs must. That's what Aston Martin had to do. It's not the most beautiful piece of kit in the world, but very few steering wheels with airbags actually built into them are. Yeah, it's a compromise you have to make, really. But we overlook these small indiscretions. Just that big, it's the best way to describe it, a bellow, really, of the Aston Martin V8. As opposed to, what would I describe an American V8 as? A boom, maybe. A bellow as opposed to a boom. There you are. But yeah, once again, just lovely. Absolutely glorious, but not too intrusive. It is when you put your foot down, you want plenty of intake roar and exhaust bellow, but other than that, when you're cruising along, it's just the whole thing quietens down and is quite serene. A well-balanced car is a good place to be. Once again, let's open the taps. I can certainly tell the difference in handling between this and the Vantage Le Mans. The turn-in is definitely not the same, but it's horses for courses. It really is. What do you want? If you want a mile-liter, I think this has a similar sort of flavour as a Bentley Continental R or a Bentley Turbo R. Very much the British way of doing things. And yeah, none the worse for that. Lovely car, this. Let's just knock it down again. And here we go. Oh, bella, bella. What a lovely car this is. So satisfying to drive, so capable. I could just imagine myself driving to the south of France in this. Just lovely. The hidden Aston Martin gem, the Aston Martin V8 Coupé from 1996 to 2000. Well, that concludes another Tyrrell's Classic Workshop video. Hope you've enjoyed it, and we will be back with something else very soon.